You were here to liberate, not to conquer. And so you and those others did not doubt your cause.
On June the 6th, 1984, President Reagan and some of the D-Day veterans commemorated those who died for freedom on the beaches of Normandy.
You all knew that some things are worth dying for. One's country is worth dying for, and democracy is worth dying for because it's the...
President Reagan saw the struggle with the Soviet Union in the clear-cut terms of World War II. Good versus evil.
The Soviets were willing to pursue a very aggressive foreign policy, and indeed their foreign policy, they were quite frank about it, was world domination.
This is a Soviet intercontinental ballistic missile, or ICBM, which can reach the United States 30 minutes after launch.
I remember standing out in the street of my house on a fall afternoon with the dark clouds and thinking, wow, there was this huge presence on the other side of the world that was out to get us all.
What if free people could live secure in the knowledge that we could intercept and destroy strategic ballistic missiles before they reached our own soil or that of our allies?
The President's Strategic Defense Initiative, SDI, or Star Wars, was part of his effort to neutralize communism everywhere. In Nicaragua, he supported the Contras, who were trying to topple the Soviet-supported government. In the tiny Caribbean island of Grenada, he quickly crushed a communist coup. And at home, he started the greatest peacetime defense build-up ever.
He made people feel good about our country, that it was strong economically and strong in defense, and that you felt like he could protect you from, you know, the Russians and these other countries.
But the world remained a dangerous place. In the Soviet Union, on the other hand, there was a whole new sense of optimism. After a succession of old men and old-style rule which had left the Soviet Union in deep stagnation, a vigorous new leader, Mikhail Gorbachev, came to power in 1985. Gorbachev soon began to make changes in a country long ruled by repression and fear. He instituted glasnost, or openness, and suddenly there was freedom of speech.
It was discussion openly, and I was there. I was right in the middle of it. It was something absolutely incredible.
Alexander Zurbin was a composer who had a studio in Moscow's Pushkin Square.
At the time, it was a center of political discussion. Thousands of people. One said Gorbachev is terrible, he is scoundrel, and I said, no, he is a great man, we have to support him. It was times when, you know, all the hopes were open. You know, we just were absolutely overwhelmed.
But Gorbachev's attempt to restructure the Soviet economy, perestroika, did little to shorten lines for the paltry number of available consumer goods. Soviet hopes for material progress demanded cutbacks in their defense spending, and this led to a series of summit meetings with President Reagan. The first one was in Geneva in 1985. The next one was at Reykjavik in Iceland. On a weekend in October 1986, the leaders got down to the serious business of disarmament.
And they were negotiating, frankly. Both sides are going to give up all their nuclear weapons. All their nuclear weapons.
President Reagan's director of communications was Patrick Buchanan.
I just couldn't believe that a decision of this magnitude was being made by two men on a Sunday afternoon. It was late in the afternoon, they'd taken a break, and so I got right out there. I wanted to see exactly how he looked. He looked as tough as any customer I have seen.
We're not through.
And Gorbachev told Reagan, we're going to do the deal, but you've got to give up SDI. The Soviets had spent $1 trillion building the greatest land-based missile force on Earth. And here was Ronald Reagan, who was developing a system that was going to turn it into junk. And they believed he could do it. Ronald Reagan slammed down his hand on the table, got up and left. No.
that was the end of the summit, but not of good relations between the two leaders. A year later, Mr. Gorbachev came to Washington. Sidestepping the issue of the Strategic Defense Initiative, the leaders signed a more limited arms reduction treaty. Mr. Gorbachev was very popular in America.
Gorbachev's motorcade came around the corner on the Connecticut Avenue, and suddenly the motorcade stopped. And then the door opened and Gorbachev got out and began working the crowd along Connecticut Avenue like an American politician. People around me were rapt. I remember a young woman looking out through the crowd and smiling on her face, and she said, "God bless you, Mr. Gorbachev."
It's great that he came out to meet us all like that.
That was very special. He didn't have to do it, and he did it. I am very surprised and pleased.
What do you think of Gorbachev?
The guy is a PR genius. I mean, jumping out of the car like that. Unbelievable.
That's great.
You got to shake his hand.
I did!
6 months later, President Reagan went to Moscow.
There was a sense that this long nightmare of the threat of nuclear holocaust, of the Cold War, somehow that was coming to an end.
We find ourselves standing like this.
We meant to change a nation, and instead, we changed a world.
"1989 was a momentous year. First in China, where just at about the time that Mikhail Gorbachev was paying a visit, Chinese students occupied their country's most important square.
What I'm seeing on television cannot be happening. Chinese students marching into Tiananmen Square carrying a large plaster goddess of democracy, very similar to the Statue of Liberty.
In the heart of the largest communist country in the world, the American symbol of freedom towered over demonstrations for democracy.
There clearly was a historic, significant event. I had a feeling it wasn't going to last very long.
And it did not. On June the 4th, the demonstrations were crushed. Chile. In Eastern Europe, which the Soviets had held by force since World War II, Mikhail Gorbachev said that Moscow would no longer interfere, and the people felt free to act. Poland's solidarity was never dead, only in hibernation. Today, the independent union movement leads a government with a non-communist majority. Solidarity's time had come after all. In Hungary, where Soviet tanks had broken the last revolution in the 1950s, the revolution of the 80s was gradual. But the Communist Party was forced to apologize for the Soviet crackdown in the 50s, and the party was forced by the people to call free elections. And when Hungary began to roll up the Iron Curtain, tens of thousands of East Germans saw it on West German television. The word spread in no time.
Wunderbar, super, ganz super.
First, they headed for those openings in the fence between Hungary and Austria.
Let's go!
And then they headed for the West German embassy in next-door Czechoslovakia. The pressure of East Germans fleeing in such numbers forced the East German government to make one concession after another. The country was hemorrhaging. The pressure was too much. The communist leadership buckled. travel restrictions, it said, would be lifted. It was a momentous declaration. And that very night, for the first time since 1961, they made a hole in the Berlin Wall. It had not seemed possible only months ago. Now anything seemed possible. Romania. In the last days of the decade, even the hardline leadership of Nicolae Ceausescu, who had gunned down his own people to stay in power, finally folded. Czechoslovakia, with one of the toughest leaderships in the Soviet sphere. And the Communist Party was brought down in less than a month. At the end of the 1980s, so many walls were coming down. It was a magnificent decade for democracy.
Images of the 80s with Peter Jennings, brought to you by AT&T, the right choice. And Buick and your Buick dealer. The great American road belongs to Buick.
Some people think only foreign companies build quality cars. Now, according to an